We're heading into the middle of the Atlantic now because we're going to look at one of the most famous shipwrecks of all time, the focus of all those documentaries.
Before his time runs out, Titanic's explorer Robert Ballard has admitted something he long kept buried beneath the waves. For decades, the man who gave the world its first haunting glimpse of the world's most famous shipwreck carried secrets darker than rusted steel and broken chandeliers. He wasn't just a scientist with a camera. He wasn't just an explorer chasing ghosts of the past. He was also something else entirely, a man bound to secrets so sensitive that even history itself seemed to bend around them. What Ballard finally revealed doesn't just change how we see Titanic. It changes how we see him. The Titanic's rediscovery is often told as a story of triumph, of obsession rewarded, of human persistence overcoming impossible odds. The grainy video footage of the ship's bow, emerging out of the darkness like some ghostly cathedral, has become one of the most iconic images in modern history. Children learned his name in classrooms, journalists crowned him an adventurer of the century, and Ballard himself seemed to embrace the spotlight as both explorer and storyteller. But the truth, hidden for years beneath layers of classified files and Cold War silence, reveals a story far more complicated than the neat narrative the public was sold. The Titanic was indeed found. Ballard's team did indeed achieve the impossible, but the path to that discovery was paved with secret bargains, naval intelligence, and the shadowy world of geopolitics. This isn't just a story about discovery. It's about confession. It's about legacy. And most of all, it's about the ghosts of the deep, both those who perished in 1912 and those who lurked in the secrecy of the Cold War. Long before Robert Ballard became synonymous with Titanic, he was simply a boy staring at maps, oceans, and the mysteries beyond the horizon. Born in 1942 in Wichita, Kansas, about as far from the ocean as one could imagine, his fascination with water came not from what surrounded him, but from what eluded him. Kansas offered endless plains, but no waves, no tides, no endless horizon. His father was an engineer with a defense company, and his work eventually moved the family westward. In San Diego, young Robert finally met the sea in person. The Pacific stretched out before him, vast, unknowable, alive with possibilities. For a boy with a restless mind, it was like being handed a key to an infinite library. He began studying maps, tracing coastlines with his fingers, wondering what mysteries waited beneath those dark blue stretches. He was not content with mere daydreams. Ballard's fascination was deliberate, methodical. He nurtured it through academics. At the University of California, Santa Barbara, he studied geology and chemistry, laying a scientific foundation. He also joined the U.S. Army Reserve, proving himself capable of discipline and resilience. Later, he pursued a master's degree in geophysics, then pushed further to earn a doctorate in marine geology and geophysics from the University of Rhode Island. But education was only part of the story. Many scientists are content to write papers, to live in laboratories, to expand knowledge quietly. Ballard was different. He had an instinct not only for discovery, but also for performance. He wanted to see the hidden world with his own eyes, and more importantly, he wanted to show it to others. This blend of curiosity and charisma made him unique. He saw oceans not just as ecosystems or geological puzzles, but as stages, places where history, science, and storytelling could intersect. He imagined not just discovering, but unveiling, transforming research into spectacle. That vision, born in the restless boy staring at the Pacific, would later shape everything. His passion for the sea was genuine, but so was his hunger for recognition. He wanted not just to know the ocean's secrets, but to make the world care about them too. By the 1970s, Robert Ballard was no longer the boy tracing maps in his bedroom. He had become one of the most ambitious minds in oceanography. While many of his peers published in journals and remained behind desks, Ballard tinkered with machines, pushing technology to places others thought impractical or impossible. He was obsessed with robotic submersibles, machines capable of plunging to depths where human divers would be crushed. These devices could carry cameras, sensors, and manipulators into the deep, offering humanity's first direct glimpses of an alien world. His colleagues often dismissed these ideas as unrealistic. But Ballard's ambition wasn't just scientific. He had an eye for showmanship. He knew discovery wasn't enough. It needed to be witnessed. This duality, scientist and performer, was both his greatest strength and his greatest liability. Admirers called him brilliant. Critics called him arrogant. The truth? He was both. To find what no one else had found required not only intelligence, but ego, persistence, and an unshakable belief in himself. His early discoveries proved his instincts right. He explored hydrothermal vents, sites where boiling water spewed from cracks in the Earth's crust, creating ecosystems unlike anything humans had ever imagined. Strange, otherworldly creatures thrived in total darkness, sustained not by sunlight, but by chemical energy from beneath the Earth. These findings shook biology to its foundations, rewriting what scientists thought possible about life itself. But here's the irony. While scientists celebrated, the public barely noticed. Academic journals applauded. Ordinary people shrugged. Hydrothermal vents might have revolutionized science, but they didn't capture headlines. Ballard wasn't satisfied with respect inside the academic circle. He wanted more. He wanted a discovery that would capture the imagination of the entire world. A revelation so iconic it would etch his name into history books, not just scholarly footnotes. And so his eyes turned toward the ultimate stage, the Titanic. The RMS Titanic was no ordinary shipwreck. It was legend. A floating palace that struck an iceberg in April 1912, killing over 1,500 passengers and crew. For decades, treasure hunters fantasized about finding it. Filmmakers dreamed of raising it. Enthusiasts speculated about its exact resting place. Yet the ocean is vast, and Titanic was but one of thousands lost. Many believed the ship would never be found. Searching for it seemed absurd, like hunting for a single needle in a continent-sized haystack. But Ballard saw something others didn't. He saw not just a wreck, but an opportunity. A chance to combine his passion for technology, his hunger for discovery, and his instinct for storytelling into one grand mission. If he could find Titanic, he wouldn't just make history. He would become history. And so, with relentless ambition and the charisma to attract funding and teams, he prepared to chase the impossible. By the early 1980s, Ballard's reputation as a pioneer in deep-sea exploration was secure, but not yet legendary. He had the tools, the knowledge, and the determination. What he needed was the stage. The Titanic provided it. Finding Titanic was more than a scientific mission. It was a global spectacle waiting to happen. For Ballard, it was a perfect convergence. His robotic submersibles, honed through years of trial and error, were finally capable of sustained deep-sea operations. The world, still fascinated by Titanic after more than 70 years, was eager for closure, and Ballard himself was ready to etch his name into the history books. The pursuit wasn't just about history or technology. It was about branding. Ballard understood that Titanic was a cultural touchstone. If he found it, he would not only advance science but also ensure his name lived forever in the public imagination. And so he assembled teams, raised funds, and sharpened his technology. Unlike other explorers who stumbled into discovery, Ballard had positioned himself carefully. He was preparing not just for science, but for spectacle. When 1985 arrived, he was ready. The submersibles descended into the abyss, combing the seafloor for signs of the legendary ship. Each hour dragged. Each pass of sonar seemed futile. The ocean was vast, and time was running out. Then came the moment. Titanic's remains, silent and massive, emerged from the darkness. First, the debris field, then the boilers, and finally the bow itself, still eerily intact. For Ballard, this was more than triumph. It was destiny fulfilled. Years of obsession, ambition, and preparation had led to this instant. He wasn't simply a man who stumbled across history. He had created the moment, and he knew exactly how to use it. But here's the twist. What the world saw was only half the story. On September 1st, 1985, Robert Ballard's name blazed across headlines around the world. He and his Franco-American team had done what generations before them failed to do. They had found Titanic. Newspapers screamed triumph. Television anchors delivered the news with awe. The unsinkable ship that had slipped into the Atlantic's cold embrace in 1912 had finally been rediscovered more than 70 years later. But behind the cameras, a different story played out. A story wrapped in secrecy, politics, and the shadow of the Cold War. The public narrative was clean and heroic. Ballard, the explorer, armed with advanced submersibles, had tracked down the wreck against all odds. What almost no one knew was that this mission was not simply about Titanic. In fact, Titanic was the secondary goal, the cover for a much darker classified operation. Ballard had been working with the U.S. Navy. Years earlier, the Navy approached him with a delicate problem. Two nuclear submarines, USS Thresher and USS Scorpion, had sunk in the Atlantic during the Cold War. Their exact conditions at the ocean floor were unknown. The military feared two possibilities: radioactive leaks contaminating the sea, or Soviet interference with the wrecks. Either outcome was unacceptable. They needed someone with the technology and expertise to find and survey the submarines without alerting the world. Enter Robert Ballard. His robotic submersibles and deep-sea systems were perfect tools for the job. But there was a catch. The Navy couldn't simply announce it was scouring the ocean for nuclear secrets. They needed a diversion. Ballard provided it. He proposed that after completing the Navy's classified surveys, he could tack on a search for Titanic. If he succeeded, the press would focus entirely on that discovery, and the submarine missions would remain in the shadows. It was a perfect arrangement. Ballard got funding and access. The Navy got cover and secrecy. And so, before Titanic ever came into the picture, Ballard's team explored the wrecks of Thresher and Scorpion. They studied debris fields, took photographs, and ensured no dangerous leaks or Soviet tampering threatened national security. Only once that job was complete did Ballard turn his attention to Titanic. When he did find it, the world believed it was the sole mission. They saw history reclaimed. They saw ghosts resurrected from the deep. They did not see the Cold War intelligence operation that had made it possible. For decades, Ballard kept this truth buried, bound by secrecy and loyalty to the Navy. It wasn't until much later that he admitted the full story. And when he did, reactions were mixed. Some were stunned that Titanic's rediscovery, the event that had reignited the world's fascination with the great liner, was not purely an act of scientific pursuit, but part of a geopolitical bargain. To others, the revelation only deepened the mystique. It painted Titanic not just as a relic of Edwardian hubris and tragedy, but also as a pawn in the chessboard of the 20th century. The ship had become entangled in Cold War secrets, rediscovered not solely for history, but because the Navy needed a distraction. What does it mean when one of the greatest discoveries of modern times is, at its core, an accident of geopolitics? It forces us to see Ballard not just as an explorer, but also as a man playing a role in something much bigger than himself. He was a scientist, yes, but also a strategist and perhaps even an unwitting pawn in a game of nuclear shadows. The world never suspected that the same mission that unveiled Titanic's ghostly bow also inspected the wreckage of Cold War submarines. Yet that's the truth Ballard finally confessed. Titanic was history rediscovered, but it was also camouflage. When Titanic appeared out of the darkness in 1985, the images sent shivers through the world. The ship's bow was eerily intact, its railings still in place, its massive anchor chains coiled like they had been abandoned only yesterday. Then came the boilers, giant, rusting, but instantly recognizable. They matched those of Titanic's sister ship Olympic, leaving no doubt. This was it. Ballard's gamble had paid off. Years of preparation, innovation, and obsession had led to the impossible. His team captured the first haunting images, and in that grainy video feed, Ballard knew his legacy was secure. The world's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Survivors of the disaster wept as they saw the ship again after 7 decades of silence. Children who had never heard of oceanography suddenly spoke about sonar and robots. News outlets broadcast the eerie footage across the globe. Ballard was no longer just a scientist. He was a celebrity, but fame is never simple. With triumph came controversy. Ballard insisted Titanic was a grave site and should remain untouched. He pleaded for governments to protect it, warning against salvagers who saw dollar signs in its artifacts. To him, Titanic was sacred, yet his own fame made his position complicated. Critics accused him of hypocrisy. After all, wasn't he the man who had broken the silence? Who had turned the shipwreck into a global spectacle? Lawsuits erupted over who owned Titanic. Some companies argued it was fair game for salvage. Others agreed with Ballard, calling it a memorial to the dead. This moral clash only intensified as Ballard himself leaned into his newfound role as storyteller. He appeared on talk shows, co-authored books, and produced documentaries, presenting Titanic not just as a wreck, but as a stage for reflection on ambition, hubris, and fate. The irony was sharp. Ballard's success made him a hero, but also unleashed a frenzy he could not control. He had given Titanic back to the world, but in doing so, he had also given it to corporations, to marketers, to anyone who wanted a piece of it. Titanic mania had begun, and it was far bigger than Robert Ballard. The rediscovery of Titanic in 1985 didn't just mark a scientific achievement, it ignited a cultural explosion. Overnight, the ship became a global obsession again. For survivors, only a handful still alive, the news was bittersweet. Some expressed gratitude that the world would remember the ship anew. Others were horrified, calling the exploration a violation of a sacred graveyard. That tension, between history and exploitation, defined Titanic's second life. Media outlets devoured the story. Newspapers splashed Titanic across their front pages. Television networks aired interviews with Ballard and documentaries featuring the haunting footage. Book publishers rushed to reprint old Titanic accounts while new ones flooded the market. The ship that had slept in silence was suddenly everywhere. Ballard himself became a household name. For many, he was the modern Jacques Cousteau, a charismatic explorer who made science thrilling. School children studied Titanic as part of history lessons. Kids begged for Titanic toys and models. Ballard's discovery made oceanography accessible, even glamorous. But with this cultural explosion came fierce debates. Ballard fought to protect Titanic as a memorial, while salvagers pushed for artifact recovery. Museums and private collectors clamored for relics, from china plates to jewelry. Courtrooms became battlegrounds over ownership. Was Titanic the property of the world? Of salvagers? Of no one. Meanwhile, Hollywood took notice. Documentaries multiplied. Miniseries aired. And eventually, James Cameron's 1997 blockbuster immortalized Titanic for a new generation. Without Ballard's rediscovery, that cultural wave might never have reached such heights. Yet even as Titanic became pop culture, the line between reverence and spectacle blurred. Was it history or entertainment? Was it mourning or profit? Ballard often voiced frustration at the commercialization, but he could not deny his role in sparking it. The fever spread beyond anything he could control. Titanic had been reborn, not just as a tragedy, but as a brand. And Ballard, whether he liked it or not, was forever tied to it. In the decades since 1985, Robert Ballard's name has remained tethered to Titanic. For the public, he is the man who gave the world its first glimpse of the great ship's grave, who transformed oceanography into spectacle, who turned a forgotten wreck into a living legend. But beneath the glory lies complexity. His confession, that Titanic's rediscovery was entwined with Cold War secrecy, adds shadows to his legacy. He was not simply an explorer. He was also part of a bargain, a man who helped shield one of the Navy's most sensitive missions. Perhaps that duality is why his story endures. Ballard embodies the contradictions of exploration itself: ambition and ego, discovery and deception, reverence and spectacle. He found Titanic, but he also unleashed Titanic mania. He gave the world a ghost, but he also commodified it. As he once admitted, the moment he found Titanic was both his greatest triumph and his deepest burden, because from that day forward, he carried not just the weight of history, but the weight of secrets. In the end, Robert Ballard's story is not just about a shipwreck. It's about the price of discovery. It's about how history is shaped not only by what we find, but by what we choose to reveal and what we keep hidden. He gave the world Titanic. But in doing so, he also gave it his ghosts. Ballard didn't stop with Titanic. The fame could have made him retire into comfort, living off books, lectures, and documentaries, but his restless nature wouldn't allow it. Exploration was in his blood. In the years following Titanic, Ballard turned his eyes to other wrecks. He located the German battleship Bismarck, sunk in 1941, resting nearly 3 miles below the Atlantic. He searched for and documented dozens of historic shipwrecks, each with its own haunting story. For Ballard, Titanic had been the spark, but the ocean was infinite. He wanted to map its secrets, wreck by wreck, trench by trench. Unlike many who are content with one triumph, he craved the chase, and with each mission, he added another layer to his legacy, proving that Titanic was not a one-time miracle, but part of a lifelong obsession with the deep. But the shadow of Titanic never left him. No matter what he found, Bismarck, John F. Kennedy's PT-109, or ancient wrecks in the Mediterranean, the public always brought him back to Titanic. Interviews always circled back to that night in 1985. Ballard had joined the ranks of explorers cursed by their greatest discovery. He had found his Mount Everest, and everything else was measured against it. Beyond the documentaries and headlines, who was Robert Ballard, really? Colleagues described him as brilliant, driven, and occasionally difficult. He was a perfectionist who demanded excellence from those around him. Some admired his relentless ambition. Others whispered about arrogance. Yet beneath the hard edges was a man haunted by time. He often spoke about the people who died on Titanic, about how walking its decks with his robot cameras felt like walking in a cemetery. Ballard carried a spiritual reverence for the deep sea. He was not just an adventurer, but also a mourner, someone who believed the ocean held not just history, but souls. In interviews, he revealed a streak of vulnerability. He admitted to loneliness, to the toll that constant travel and obsession took on his personal life. Fame had its price, and while the world knew Robert Ballard the legend, only a few knew Robert Ballard the man, the dreamer from Kansas, who had once stared at maps and imagined adventures that most thought impossible. Decades after its rediscovery, Titanic continues to cast its spell. Museums display its artifacts. Tourists line up to see exhibitions. Writers, filmmakers, and historians endlessly retell its story. Children still gasp when they see the haunting images of its bow emerging from the dark. Ballard often reflected on why Titanic, out of all shipwrecks, refused to fade from memory. Part of it was timing. The sinking happened at the dawn of modernity, when the world believed technology had conquered nature. Titanic's fate shattered that illusion. It became a symbol of hubris, of class divisions, of human tragedy, and yet, rediscovering it in 1985 gave the ship a second life. Suddenly, Titanic was not just history, it was present. Ballard's cameras reawakened it, and in doing so, he ensured that Titanic would never truly die. Even today, Titanic's story is inseparable from Ballard's. When people speak of one, they think of the other. He did not just find a shipwreck. He found a myth, a ghost story that the world refuses to let go. Looking back, Robert Ballard's story is about more than exploration. It is about obsession, about the collision of history and secrecy, about how one man's dream can alter the world's memory. His confession, that the discovery of Titanic was bound to Cold War missions, reminds us that even history's purest moments often carry shadows. Yet perhaps that's what makes them real. Heroes are never simple. Discoveries are never clean. Ballard gave us Titanic, but he also gave us something larger, the reminder that the ocean is still a place of mystery, still vast, still holding secrets that shape who we are. And maybe that is his truest legacy, because long after the last survivor has passed, long after Titanic has rusted into the seabed, the story of how Robert Ballard revealed its resting place will endure. It is a story of triumph and burden, of pride and secrecy, of ghosts found and ghosts carried. And it is a story that, like Titanic itself, will never sink. After Titanic, Ballard refused to slow down. He became the world's most famous undersea detective, chasing ghosts of steel and salt across the oceans. He hunted down the German battleship Bismarck, the ship Adolf Hitler once called unsinkable. He traced John F. Kennedy's patrol boat PT-109, rediscovering the vessel that had shaped the young president's wartime legend. Every wreck told a story, and Ballard believed the ocean was the greatest archive humanity had. There were battles frozen in time, ancient vessels that carried wine and olive oil 2,000 years ago, submarines that had never surfaced again. Ballard wasn't just cataloging ships. He was unraveling human history one graveyard at a time. But with each new wreck, the Titanic loomed. No matter what he found, people wanted to hear about that night in 1912, about the bow of the great liner resting like a ghost in the abyss. Ballard sometimes admitted frustration. "I've found dozens of ships," he'd say, "but everyone only wants to talk about Titanic." And yet, he couldn't escape it. Titanic had made him immortal. Everything else was a footnote. Exploration has its costs. For Ballard, the toll was both personal and emotional. Endless days at sea meant weeks away from home. Friendships frayed, relationships cracked, and a sense of isolation grew. He confessed in interviews that being an explorer often meant being a loner, and at times being misunderstood. Then there was the weight of Titanic itself. Ballard had walked its decks with his cameras, seen shoes and china plates resting where lives had ended. He never forgot that this was not just a shipwreck, but a grave. He carried those images with him, ghosts that whispered in the dark. The fame, too, was a double-edged sword. Ballard was hailed as a hero, but with celebrity came scrutiny. Critics accused him of hypocrisy, profiting from Titanic's story while condemning others who wanted to salvage artifacts. He bristled at the commercialization of the wreck, even as his own documentaries brought it into millions of homes. It was a paradox he lived with for the rest of his life. The man who gave Titanic back to the world, but also the man who could never escape it. Ballard often warned that Titanic was dying. The ship was slowly being devoured by iron-eating bacteria, its steel collapsing into the seabed. What had been preserved in eerie stillness for 70 years was now disintegrating before human eyes. He argued passionately that Titanic should be protected, not plundered. To him, it was not just a wreck, but a cemetery. Thousands had died there, and disturbing it was like desecrating a grave. Yet expeditions came anyway, tourist dives, artifact recovery missions, even proposals to raise parts of the ship. Ballard knew the end was inevitable. One day, Titanic would vanish entirely into rust and silt, but he believed its story would outlive the wreck. He said, "The Titanic will eventually go back to nature, but its spirit will never leave us. We've made sure of that." In a strange way, Ballard's discovery gave Titanic a second death. It reawakened the ship for a generation, only to watch it crumble once more. And that perhaps was the saddest part of all. Ballard never wanted exploration to end with him. In his later years, he shifted focus toward education. He founded the Ocean Exploration Trust and created programs that connected classrooms with live expeditions. Through satellites and internet broadcasts, students could join him in real time as he uncovered new secrets of the sea. He believed the greatest discovery of all wasn't Titanic or Bismarck, but sparking curiosity in young minds. He often said, "If you want to explore, start by exploring your imagination." Children who had grown up watching his Titanic footage now saw him as a mentor. He turned exploration into a legacy, one that could outlast his own lifetime. Robert Ballard's story is filled with contradictions. He was a scientist, yet also a showman. A guardian of Titanic, yet also its exploiter. A man of secrets, yet also of confessions. His admission about the Navy's covert missions changed how people saw him. Was he a hero or simply a pawn in Cold War games? Did he find Titanic for glory, or as a cover story for nuclear espionage? The truth, as always, was somewhere in between. But perhaps that's what makes his story compelling. Pure heroes don't exist. Pure stories rarely survive history. Ballard was complex, and so was Titanic. In the end, Robert Ballard's life is a mirror of the ship he found. Titanic was a story of ambition and hubris, of triumph and tragedy. Ballard's own journey carried the same themes: unimaginable success, hidden costs, haunting secrets. He once said, "I've spent my life looking into the past, but what I really found was myself." The Titanic will one day collapse into the ocean floor, The man who found it will one day pass into history, but their stories are now forever entwined. One ship, one man, one confession that changed the way we see the ocean and ourselves.